avatar Adida Samraj, who was my teacher for almost 20 years, will rank perpetually as one of the most colorful adepts who ever lived. I think it's safe to say. And both of them remain dear to my heart to this day and forever. And I don't agree with either one of them about most things. But I do agree about the primacy of the heart. And so what they were saying was that the heart is actually the source of even the whole spiritual display that is felt to be above and outside. And they point to that esoterically, and I won't go into the details of all that pointing. What's significant is that both of them were describing how the process comes down into the heart and establishes a different quality of realization on that basis. And Adida in particular was able to realize an embodiment of consciousness and an embrace of the world and of life that he said was quite new and that he found no precedence for. And you see, I was an editor and an educator in that community, so I had to know as precisely as possible all the details of his teaching. So I benefited from his study of thousands and thousands and thousands of books that came through our ashram or community that he was looking into to see how his work stacked up against the traditions. So there's a recognition then that this realization of existence as a great singularity from the heart is radical. And you see, radical doesn't mean just that in our work and in what I would call radical organismic sentient emergence, which I wouldn't apply that phrase to either Ramana Maharshi or Adida's orientations, for reasons I'll probably get around to explaining here. But in our work, it's not just that you are trying to get to something radical. The whole process is generated as a radical event, even long before you can know it as such in yourself. By participating in this transmission field, in effect, what's happening? Like that little transmission gazing thing we just did. And then, as you turn around and gaze with one another also, what's winding up happening is that that radical source root of existence is getting turned on. It's getting activated in each and every participant from the beginning. In many cases, that is already happening when you find this work. So, Darren, if I may quote you, I hope you're okay with this, said to me today, "I feel like I've been rotting my whole life." People who say that are already established to a significant degree in a life that's generated from the core. So things that are generated more peripherally, even profound soul openings and ecstatic illuminations that open your heart beautifully, awaken you to deep compassion and radiant presence. If they're not established in that heart core, then you are in effect trying to get there from a place that's outside. Now, I realize this is confusing. I can't help that. Because when you're going through the rot, you may feel like you're anything but established in some radical source, core, root of your existence. Right? I mean, I am technically correct here, yes?
Yes.
Okay. So, I'm aware that this is going to stimulate some confusion. and seem to be very paradoxical. But I'm not at liberty to sugarcoat it or to try to pretend it's otherwise. That's part of why we say to you strongly, tank up on transmission. Listen to the teachings and make sure you are listened to. So if we could see a plasma version, like those kind of weird machines that they used to put together where you could see the plasma moving into, one color and the other emerging and so forth. If we had a plasma readout of what's going on in this process, even from your earliest involvement, your own heart core root essence of being is being given a great big green light, or it is being turned on, or you're finding your way to this because that is already coming alive and awake in you, and you don't yet know it. You may feel, my practice has gone flat. You may feel, I'm never going to be any good at anything. You may feel, I've failed at all spiritual practice. I can't do the things that they tell me as an ego or a soul to do to get to my ultimate truth. I'm no good at that stuff. That's often the feeling of people coming into this work, or they might have done quite well and still feel, this ain't it. It's not getting to core. Might not think it in those terms, but there's a feeling. It's not enough. I'm not enough. Something's wrong here. So the feelings of all this are very primal, but the comprehension of it calls for a bit of, I don't want to say sophistication, but complexity. Okay? It calls for complexity to understand yourself this way. The process is organismic. It's not generated from one part trying to work on another. It's a whole being unfolding. I mean, interestingly enough, long before all of this came to mind, if you go back down to the building there and look at my book, The White Hot Yoga of the Heart, which was the first book I wrote. One of the very first essays I wrote was called The Energy of the Rose. And as Linda can tell you, roses have been primal to, they've been a primary symbol from the beginning. And part of what I was saying about the energy of the rose is that if you look at a rose bud, it looks like it's tight. It hasn't started to open yet. The bud is fully formed, but it hasn't started to open yet. It looks like there's this incredible centripetal inward force, gravitation almost, that is holding those petals tight. And then at some point, it just goes and blooms, blossoms. This kind of process is that kind of organismic. A lot of what Linda and I and Krishna, Vivian, Leslie, Max, Ted, Hillary, who else is here as teachers this week? Not remembering. A lot of what we and all the other teachers do is on some level hold your hand while you're making the transition from having been engaged in an orientation to self-growth and development that is not organismic to one that is. Because you're going to be chronically tending to think that you're blowing it, and you come to us and we reframe your understanding of what you're going through.